and welcome to another episode of the Game Design Podcast. Once again, my name is Brad Carney, and I am the founder of Final Boss Entertainment, who recently developed Rack. If you're unfamiliar with Rack, just imagine if aliens from another dimension where things have thick black outlines and swinging a sword makes things explode into bloody pieces decided to come to our dimension and make a game that was realistic from their standpoint. That's basically what Rack is. So today we're talking about both difficulty and fairness. I think they're concepts that get confused a lot, and I think it's important to make a distinction between them. Difficulty has to do with the overall challenge of beating a game, and is heavily affected by both your personal skill and how punishing and unforgiving the game is. For instance, if you've ever played a game like Super Meat Boy that mercilessly punishes you for making even the slightest mistake, you're certainly familiar with difficulty. Fairness, though, is something different. Fairness has to do with putting the player in a position where success is even possible. It's making sure the player has all the tools needed to win, and that the basic ground rules have been established. If a game puts you in a position where the only way to succeed is to psychically know what's coming, that's not really fair, is it? If you're fighting against a bunch of invisible monsters without any way to detect their presence, don't you feel a little bit cheated? It's definitely great when games are difficult and challenging. After all, overcoming a challenge is a fantastic feeling. But what's not great is when games are unfair. Remember all the way back to episode 1 where we talked about how people inherently like games because they help build our skills? Well, when a game puts you in a position where you can't win, then what's the point? The game isn't encouraging you to develop any sort of skill to overcome the situation. You just get screwed through no fault of your own, and that sucks. And I think it's something that roguelikes have trouble with. In a non-roguelike where you don't have things like procedurally generated levels to worry about, you can carefully plan things out, like the order in which resources and monsters are introduced, challenges players will face, and what tools they'll have to face those challenges. In a roguelike, though, where so much of the game is randomized, you can easily put the player in some unfair situations. Maybe the player runs into a room of enemies they don't have enough ammo to kill, even if they've searched everywhere. Maybe the player gets swarmed by enemies in a later level and weren't given adequate weapons in earlier ones. Now, maybe you're a smart cookie, which, by the way, is a weird saying. Cookies are extremely dumb. And are thinking, but wait, can a game be so difficult that it's unfair? And you would be correct. Now, let's take a game that's completely fair and most people know about. Let's say Dance Dance Revolution, or DDR as the cool kids like to say. Now, for those of you who don't know, it's basically a music game where you tap any of 4 arrows on a dance pad during certain beats of a song. And it's a very fair game. It shows you which upcoming arrows you're supposed to press, and never asks you to press more than 2 at a time. After all, it's a game made for bipeds, not you weird triped people. And most of the songs are somewhere between 60 and 180 beats per minute. So with a little practice, most songs can be completed by most able-bodied people. But what if we were to speed things up by, say, double, triple, 10 times, 100 times? Suddenly the game has gone from being difficult to being impossible, unfair. Human beings have physical and mental limitations, and no amount of practice would ever be sufficient. It's not fair to give them a challenge they have no hope of completing. Again, going back to episode 1, it defeats the purpose of playing a game in the first place. Also, just to clarify, fairness doesn't necessarily come from something being too difficult. Something can be easy, but not necessarily fair. For instance, if I flip a coin and demand that you pick the right one like some jerk, it's easy to get lucky and pick the right side, but it's certainly not fair to you. You have no way of knowing which one is the right one and aren't developing any sort of ability or getting anything out of it. So what got me started on this topic was Crypt the NecroDancer. For those of you who don't know, it's kind of like DDR in that it's a rhythm game where you're tapping arrows to the beats of music, but it's also a dungeon crawler roguelike on top of that. As I've been trying to get the hardest achievement in the game, where you have to beat the whole game without picking up any items, not taking any damage, and not missing a beat. Yeah, it's insane. I've been asking myself if that's even fair. Obviously, it's incredibly difficult. There's no question about that, but is it fair? And I'll share my thoughts on that a little later. So, what are some ways to ensure that your game is fair? How do you know if your game is too hard to the point at which it isn't fair? What are some pitfalls developers fall into that doom their game to unfairness? I'll be talking about all this and more with Stephan Caffa, the developer of the upcoming game Horizon Danger. I'm joined now by Stephan Caffa, who is the lead developer of the upcoming game Horizon Danger, which actually just got greenlit and will be coming out on Steam soon, right?
Yeah, I don't know if it's coming to Steam soon, but I got greenlit just one day before New Year's Eve, so that was pretty exciting.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
and congratulations on getting through that gauntlet too. You know, we had to go through Greenlight too, and that was not an easy process. That was a stressful time, a trying time, but
it's pretty stressful, and it's really I learned a lot from that because I took a kind of like a hands-off approach, but once it was on a Greenlight, it started to getting serious. So yeah.
Definitely. And so, I mean, just kind of like the way I know you, is you're actually, like, I guess the instructor of Remco, who's one of he was the lead artist on Rack, and he's the same thing on this new game. So I guess you're his instructor, so I'm sorry about that. Having to deal with him on a...
Oh, no problem. He's a good student. So I'm a teacher at a university, and there's a small part at the where we teach game design. So, and we are more focused on serious games. So, but yeah, that's something that I do during the day. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Today we're kind of talking about the idea of difficulty and fairness. So, you know, it kind of like I was saying in the intro, like I feel like these are concepts that get confused a lot and conflated. And, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that in general so we can kind of understand how they're different and how these two different things affect games a lot. So I was kind of mentioning how difficulty is just kind of like the amount of skill you generally need to beat something, whereas fairness is kind of it's kind of luck. It's kind of the player having all the tools needed to win, and it kind of the outcomes being kind of dictated by the player's skill and everything. But before we kind of get into the difficulty and fairness of Horizon Danger, why don't you tell people a little bit about the game? So it's kind of like a 2 to 4 player local deathmatch platformer kind of game.
That's basically it. It's a local multiplayer game, and it's kind of like I always describe it as Bomberman, but just way more hectic.
Okay.
And just lots of explosions, and it's deathmatch and team deathmatch, and currently also working on some other game modes to spice things up. But it's a local multiplayer game. Yeah.
Cool.
For 2 to 4 players.
Yeah. I mean, just kind of like visually, it's kind of like laid out like the old Mario Brothers game, where it's kind of like all on one screen, and it's 2D, and you kind of like jump onto the platforms above and below you, and so I mean you're kind of trying to do that to get an edge on the other player, but it's basically player versus player.
Yeah, and it's kind of like 1 versus 1 is quite different with when you have like 2 versus 2 or like 4 players at the same time. But it's always kind of a little bit like cat and mouse, because you have a gun, and with the gun you can stun other players, and you have the other ability to drop a bomb, and the bomb is the only way to kill the other player. So what you want to do is stun the other player and then drop a bomb near them, or just drop a bomb and time it so it explodes when the other player is there. So it's kind of like cat and mouse.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's the gun and bomb is kind of like a combo. Like you kind of use one to set up the other. Yeah. That's cool. So I mean, when I was kind of looking at this and kind of thinking whether or not if it had any kind of fairness issues, I really don't think it would, because I mean, it's first of all, like, both players, and I think this is true. Unless I was missing something, but it's like both players get like the same loadout, right? It's not like one person gets this one mech and then the other person's randomly assigned this other inferior mech or anything like that?
Yeah. It's the playing field is the same for each player. Like you got the same gun, you got the same bombs, you got the same ability. Like you can double jump, and if you double jump, you drop also a bomb. So everything is really the same. But in the beginning, I because I really liked playing Bomberman in the old days. I also had the idea to introduce power-ups or different weapons, and I play tested that a few times, and then it became really a balancing issue. Like, when do you get a power up? What does a power up do? What do other weapons do? So, then it became really difficult to find a right tension between the players.
Yeah, I mean, in a game like that, like if you could really run into like serious fairness issues, like if you give one player like a power up randomly, or you spawn one like at a random location, and just one player happens to be near it, without any kind of foresight or anything. I mean that could be a really tricky thing. So.
Oh yeah, for sure, because. The idea was that how I set it up first was that a power up would also always spawn at the same location in the map. But then you get the problem that one player is closer to the power up than the other, and that's a unfair advantage because and otherwise you get just the idea that players will camp near a power up.
Right, and that's the exact problem that Quake 3 runs into. It's it's like the better player, it's like they camp out near like the mega health, and then it's like once they get it, then they have the extra advantage of having the mega health, and then they just wait for it to respawn again and just camp there, and it's like. That's how matches run into like being like 20 to -2, even though like the two players are of like equal skill.
So Quake is a good example because in the new Quake Live version they also introduced a timer, so you can see like when a power up spawns or a new weapon spawns. I don't know if that changes things a bit, but how I changed it in Horizon Danger is actually just remove the power ups and even out the playing field again.
Yeah,
but at the moment, I'm working on different abilities so that you get other bombs and other guns. And it's in my mind, it's always like, how can I make this fair? And how can I make something else that still, feels fair to the other player? It's quite difficult.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that one of the advantages you have in this kind of genre, kind of like a visual screen layout where it's 2D and you can see everything, is that you can see everything. Like it's completely fair to both players. Like so we were kind of talking in the conversation leading up to this about how like one of the big problems that like first person games have is that you can have stuff happen behind you, and if you don't have any like sound effects playing or anything, like the player basically has no idea that it's there, and it's completely unfair, and that's something you don't really run into kind of like a 2D game like this.
Yeah, that was the main idea in the beginning, that you have just one screen, and on that screen happens everything. So it doesn't. Horizon Danger has no online multiplayer, so everything needs to happen also on the screen. So that's a win-win for me. But that's kind of like, that was pretty easy to do. Like, this is the field that you have now at the moment, and that's where the fight happens. The only problem with what I have is once you die in Horizon Danger, you spawn in about 1 second again on the playing field, and the spawn locations are fixed locations within the map. So then I encountered the problem when someone spawn camping. Yeah. So how do I deal with that? And how do I deal with once a match starts and you have 4 players? Player 1 spawns first, so he's the first one on the map instead of the other players. Like, how do I balance that again? So a lot of questions that you encounter during development with that stuff.
Yeah, I actually ran into an extremely similar issue. I mean, one of the things I did prior to Rack was a Doom 2 multiplayer source port called Skulltag. So, I mean, for those that don't know, it's a first-person shooter, and you're kind of like in arenas. I mean, not necessarily like a giant circle, but it's like there's like little buildings and open areas and everything, and like when you die, like you can respawn and in random locations that are like in set positions. So I mean, one of the favorite things that people would like to do, because on a lot of maps they're kind of small, so there's only like 4 locations. But I mean, they would camp next to spawn spots and just kind of kill people like the instant they respawn. Because I mean, if there's only 4 locations, it's pretty good that they're going to spawn like in one of the locations you're sitting at. So I mean, my kind of solution to that was to make people invulnerable for about a half a second or so when they respawn. And see, I thought that was something that added fairness to the game, because I mean, like right when you respawn, like you have no tools to deal with the campers. I mean, you're basically a sitting duck. You have no velocity. You're just kind of sitting, and like a lot of times, like they're behind you, so like you can't even see them, and like you have absolutely no warning that they're there. So like you don't know which way to dodge. So I mean, like the player is basically just in this completely unfair situation. So I tried putting that in to kind of make it a little more fair for the people respawning, and a lot of people hated it. Like I think they liked the unfairness about it. They liked the it's like these were people who were like so good at the game. They liked just kind of having those easy kills, and I think they liked it at the expense of people who weren't as good as them.
It always it always depends on who you're talking to, because the one who makes the kill, he's fine with it, but the one that gets killed is not fine with it.
Exactly, yeah. So I mean, as a designer, as a developer, sometimes you kind of have to ignore the vocal minority and do what you think is best for the vast majority of players.
Yeah, and I think it's always up to the player to decide what is fair, because you can go spawn camping. Like I used to play Counter-Strike, and sometimes you had the mode that you just had team deathmatch or something. You could spawn camp, but then it's not fun anymore because there's no real challenge. Some people think it's fun, but I think in those situations it's kind of like up to the player what they're gonna do, and I just hope that the player will look for the most fun part for either team or for either side. So yeah, I don't know about spawn camping and that stuff.
Yeah,
I don't think it.
I think it can be a little dangerous to let players kind of police that themselves, because you will have people who like to grief because people are horrible. At least some people are. I mean, some people like to do that just for the outcry, just to upset other people. And then there are those who, they want to win at all costs, and they don't care if it's making the game unfun for others. They're just going to do it, and as long as it's getting them results, they don't care it's making other people upset.
Yeah, well, that's the easy part for Horizon Danger. Like, it's a local multiplayer game, so you're playing with friends.
Yeah.
So whenever one is acting like an ass, you can just hit him, and then it's fair. Like,
hey, jerk, knock it off. Punch.
Yeah.
I definitely wanted to get into some things that designers can do to make their games fair. And again, this isn't really, we don't really want to affect difficulty at all. Like it's great to have games that are difficult, but I mean, you want to give players all the tools they have to overcome the obstacles that you're placed in their way. You want it to feel fair for them. So I mean, one of the things that we were talking about coming up to this was kind of the idea of kind of like a tutorial, and not like an explicit tutorial, like, hey, welcome to our tutorial, this game has jumping and press X to jump, like anything like that, but kind of like where a concept will be introduced in basically like a safe environment, so that you kind of have a chance to get exposed to something and get used to it, but before you're getting killed by it. So basically it's kind of telling people like what the rules are, what the mechanics are, and giving them a chance to deal with that. You're kind of giving them the tools and the ability to develop the knowledge and skill to deal with that. instead of just kind of throwing them into the gauntlet. So, I mean, I guess one of the games that you mentioned was a Super Mario 3D Land. You want to kind of tell us a little bit how that game does this?
Well, yeah, I recently stumbled upon a video that talked a little bit about the design principles of the level design, and what I do is like whenever there's a new stage, and in the stage is something new that you have to do, like you can whenever you jump, you flip a platform. Which you can jump on then. What they do is in the beginning of the stage, they introduce that mechanic in a safe environment where you can't die or fall into the lava, for example. I think that's a very clever way because I think it comes down to anticipation for the player. Like, what can I expect to happen in this level? Then it's okay instead of something that's suddenly introduced. Like, hey man, if you do this, then you die, and you feel the impact of that.
Right. Yeah.
And I like it about like something like Super Mario is there's a steady progression of it getting harder and harder, but you also learn in a proper way, like in a good progression.
Yeah, I mean the Mario games I think definitely do like a great job of that. Yeah, it's like, I mean, even like the regular Super Mario Brothers, like it kind of starts off with just like, you know, just kind of this blank screen where you can just kind of basically practice walking and moving around and jumping. Mm-hmm. And then it's just like the first kind of monster it introduces is just a little Goomba where you have to jump on, and then you know it kind of places just the regular blocks in front of you. So I mean the only way you can get past that is to figure out to jump over it. So yeah. It's, you know, it's kind of basically showing you like, hey, you can jump on monsters to kill them, and also you can move around, and you know you have to jump to get over things. You know, just kind of like very basic things, but you know it basically does all of this without really putting you in any danger. So that like later on, it's like when the game puts you in a more challenging situation where you have to use those same kind of principles, just a little more difficult of a situation. It's like, hey, you know, you were warned. You know, it's not like the game is pulling some cheap shot on you.
Oh no, certainly not. Like sometimes the levels are like extremely hard, but you have been playing for quite a while then,
right.
So you know what you can expect and what is gonna happen or what could happen. So I think that's pretty good. And
it's like you probably are going to die like on these levels, but it's like if you were like some superhuman or some like amazing game player, it's like you had all the, you know, it's like you could have beat it like if you were good enough. Like if from playing like 6 previous levels you automatic like in that time you leveled up like an extreme amount, like you could have done it. It's like the game gave you it prepared you for these challenges.
Yeah, I think it's good to tell the player like, hey man, this game is hard and you will die a lot, so there's that, instead of suddenly like saying like, yeah, you're gonna die a lot. Like you need to know what's coming, and if the player can accept it, then
yeah, you know, if you ever come into a situation where it's like, well, how was I supposed to know that? How was I supposed to be able to deal with it? You know, the game did a pretty bad job in terms of fairness, and I to the credit of, I mean, a lot of these you know, like Mario games and whatnot, like I think a lot of them do a really good job of that. So it's you know, it's a lot of kind of more amateurish things, you know, like mods and whatnot, that you generally see a lot of this kind of thing happen. So it's a testament to how good of a job the designers of these professional games do.
Yeah, I think like we also talked a little bit about the Souls game, like Demon Souls and Dark Souls.
Yeah,
I think those games do it very good. Like you get like a safer environment in the beginning, and there's a end boss or a boss, and like with Demon Souls, it's like the first boss you encounter, you can kill him, but it's nearly impossible if you're good enough. So you die, and then it's like, yeah, it's okay because you respawn again, and the only thing you lose are some souls, and that's it. So you know what was gonna happen,
right?
And
yeah.
I think that's very well done.
Yeah, yeah, and it's I mean, and it's the reason you die is because like you haven't gotten enough skill yet. Like you haven't become good enough at the game yet, which takes practice. It's not because like the game is like cheap shotting you or hitting you with something, like the game is like tricking you or hitting you with something it hasn't exposed you to. It's a matter of you just being good enough, and like that takes time, and like that's perfectly fine. That you're
Yeah,
not beating something
yeah.
on the first try.
Yeah, I think it's important to let the player know like that it is okay to die and to lose some stuff. My problem always with playing those games is I have the tendency to feel as if I can die, like I should play perfectly and just finish the game in one go. But you need to let go of that assumption that you need to do it that way, and that's something. I started thinking about it, and I think that's something that I have because of older games where you had really like a limited amount of lives and you had a few continues, and once those were up, you had to start over from the beginning. But that's not something that you have with something like a Souls game. Like you start again where you kind of left off. So yeah.
It's like when you die in those, like you drop a little bit of like souls, right? Which are like experience.
Yeah, yeah, and in the beginning, the experience, like you gather souls and you use the souls to level up again. And in the beginning, leveling up is not really that important. You think it is, but it's not. And the souls, you can once you die, you can walk to them again and pick them up, and you have them back again. But such a small amount that you can get again later on. It's not a big deal, but you think it's a big deal.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were talking about Shovel Knight a few weeks ago, and like that kind of has like a similar principle where it's like when you die, like you have infinite lives, but when you die, like you drop money where you died, and then you go back to the most recent checkpoint. And it's like at the beginning, it's like you like really need that money like to buy things and items, but like later on, it's like once you've bought everything, it's like then the money like means nothing. So it's like deaths become just kind of almost like a nuisance, like towards the end of the game. Whereas like in the beginning, it's like you really don't want that because like you really need that money. So it kind of seems like it's a little bit the opposite in Shovel Knight as it is in Dark Souls.
Yeah, I have not played Shovel Knight yet, but yeah, I don't think it's a good thing if money and you can lose it that way. That's if the importance of the money is so high. Like, yeah, that would stress me out.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a criticism of the game I have. Not that I have many. I mean, I do love the game, but it's definitely is a little bit weird in that respect. So I mean, one of the other things that I wanted to bring up as far as like ways designers can make their games fair, and I imagine the Souls games do this. I haven't played them, so I don't know. I'm definitely gonna have to at some point. But the idea of like there being some kind of like warning for attacks and like kind of like the monsters and bosses like kind of telegraphing their attacks. So I mean basically is like the idea is to basically give people a chance to react to what's coming because hey, it's human beings, like we don't have instant reaction time to things. It takes a little bit to react. So I mean kind of like by giving bosses like kind of like a warm-up animation to certain attacks that gives you like a clue, like, hey, this attack is coming, I better get ready, to do that. Whereas like if enemies and bosses like didn't have kind of way of giving you a warning, like a heads up, it just like it'd be relying too much on luck and reaction, and like the bosses would just kind of like overwhelm you without any kind of way to really. It'd be very difficult to kind of counter what they're doing from like a tactical standpoint. So
yeah, if there's no tell, this is gonna happen, so beware. And
right,
yeah.
So it's like do the bosses and Dark Souls do that or?
Yeah, they do. Like an important thing is like you really need to learn the boss, and you will die a few times, and then you start to learn like what the tell is and when you can attack and when you can't attack, and that's the important thing about Bloodborne, which actually goes a extra mile with the in the Soul series. The bosses you need to Bloodborne is much more quickly paced, and you really need to pay attention to the details of the boss because you need to dodge a lot because you have no shield, and but you need to learn you need to learn the boss and see what they are doing instead of just spamming attack buttons yeah.
I kind of feel like any game where you can beat a boss by doing that, like it's probably not the best designed game or boss. If the boss isn't getting you to like learn something or figure something out, if it's just kind of like basically an overpowered mob, it's like I mean, are you really learning anything? Are you really getting anything out of it? And I would suspect not.
I really like I've been playing a lot of Bloodborne the last few days, and the
nice
a lot
thing of other people, I think.
Yeah, I think so. If I follow Twitter, a lot of people are playing it.
Yeah.
The thing is, like the boss designs, some of them are quite cheap, but some of them are also really nicely designed. Like there are some frustrating bosses, but once you defeat them, it's the feeling of accomplishment is so big because then you pace yourself, you looked at what the boss was doing, and then it feels pretty good. But there are some bosses where you have to fight like 3 bosses at the same time, or they spawn enemies on the playing field. Then I sometimes have a feeling like it's kind of getting out of my hands because there's just too much information going on,
right?
And I can see everything, and then it becomes a little bit like more a feeling that I have to play it a little bit cheap, like cheat the boss. Then it's no fun.
Yeah,
for me.
I you know what you said about like having that sense of accomplishment after beating the boss. I think the only way you get that is from the boss being difficult and fair. Like if the boss is difficult and not fair, then when you beat it, it's just kind of like, oh well, I got lucky that one time. I didn't. I got lucky. He didn't do his one unblockable attack that kills me in one hit. Then it just kind of feels like relief. Like, okay, well, I lucked out. But if it's difficult and fair, then it's like, yeah, I figured that guy out. I had enough skill to beat him. It feels a lot more rewarding that way. And then if it's not hard and not fair, then that's basically like, I flipped a coin, I got heads, whoopee, I won. So
I'm glad I can continue playing now.
I'm glad this time wasting mechanic is over with.
Yeah, but how do you deal with the bosses in Wreck? Because they are pretty fair, but do they have tells?
Yeah, they do. We kind of try to model the bosses after kind of like Mega Man style bosses, where it's like every boss will have like 3 or 4 different attacks, and then it's like prior to each attack there's some kind of way it telegraphs what it's about to do. So for like the very first boss you fight, it's like I guess like the let's just go with the mini boss one. So like he attacks with like a wave of projectiles for both of his attacks. The first one he does, like, he stays up high and he shoots them. So it's basically he's like kind of covering the entire area you are with projectiles. And because he's like high up, it's like you have to crouch so they go under you. And then the other attack he does is like he moves down, so like you can actually like see him like fly down. And then he unleashes that same beam of projectiles like at your feet, so it's like you gotta like jump over them so they don't hit you. So he's kind of like reinforcing the crouching and jumping mechanics that you learned earlier in the level. So he does that, but the important thing is like he's kind of telegraphing what he's about to do. So like, hey, he's about to do this, I can get ready for this and I can counter it by doing this thing. The other bosses kind of work in the same kind of way, except they're more just difficult and tricky about it. The guy that gives like most people trouble, and I can tell from the Steam achievements that this is the case, because like most people don't get past him. But the boss on the third level, so he's like basically this like big tank boss who like shoots rockets and all that fun stuff. But like it's kind of like a whack-a-mole kind of thing where it's like he goes into like this tube and then he comes out on any one of 3 different ones, and the one he comes out on like determines like the kind of attack that he does. So it's like when he comes out on the left pillar, he shoots like this wave of rockets at you. When he comes out on the right pillar, he shoots like a homing rocket at you, and then when he comes out on this middle one, he shoots this like little pattern of rockets that you like, and like there's always like a gap in that, like he'll shoot like 12 rockets at you at a time, but like there's always like a certain location you can stand in where like none of his rockets are gonna hit you. So I mean, kind of what the game is asking of you is so like, hey, solve this pattern. It's like so it's like first stand here, then stand here, then stand here, then stand there, and then you're all set. So it's kind of set up where it's like if you haven't figured that out, like you're pretty much going to die every time. And then the result is that most players die every time. So, so I mean, the game is like being fair. Like it's not like pulling any cheap shots on you. Like it's, the boss has all the same behavior.
Yeah, each pattern is similar, but different.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like basically if you know like how to fight him, it's like you don't get hit like ever. So like Rack was going to used to have a challenge mode where it's going to have like all these different challenges you can do with like all these different categories, and one of them was going to be beat every boss with the pistol with 1% life. Basically, that wouldn't be doable if the bosses were unfair. If they had attacks where it's like it's just pretty much going to hit you no matter what, and you just kind of have to win a war of attrition with them. Like it wouldn't work, but because the bosses are patterned and they have tells to everything they're gonna do, it gives you a chance to deal with them. It's just a matter of you figuring it out.
Yeah, it's learning the pattern and just observing what they are doing.
Yeah.
And if you die, you also spawn at the boss again, right? Or close to the boss.
Yeah. In Rack you do, yes. Yeah, well, assuming you have lives, but if you have lives, yeah.
I think that's an important thing. Like bosses are pretty awesome in games, and once you die, it shouldn't be like a big hassle to go to the boss again. Like playing the whole stage again and investing a lot of time again, and you die and you can learn the pattern again and see where you failed and what you did wrong, and then apply the new knowledge to the fight again.
Exactly.
I think that's important. Like Super Meat Boy, like you die but you spawn again. It doesn't matter because it's so quick. That's the thing would make Super Meat Boy pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of like once you figure something out, like in the case of Super Meat Boy, it's like, oh, okay, so like I have to jump when this saw is like at this location, and I got to time this in this kind of way. It's like once you figure that out, it's like you don't want to like slog through a bunch of stuff you've already figured out to go try that again. So it's like in the case of like the bosses in that game, it's like if you make this kind of like discovery, once you die or something, like, oh, I was supposed to do that, it's like you don't want to like have to replay every level again to get back to him and take that extra, try again and kind of put that little thing you figured out to use.
Yeah, and it doesn't take like 1 hour to finish the boss. It's like maybe like a few minutes or something.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Like, how long is the player willing to invest in beating a boss, and how long do they how many times do they want to repeat this? Like, it should be quick.
Yeah,
I think now.
Yeah, and I think it kind of has to do with like how punishing and unforgiving the game is, and I would kind of tie that to difficulty, because like it's kind of like how hard are you punished for your mistakes, which ultimately makes the game more difficult to beat. It's like if you die and like you have infinite lives and you just go back like a room or whatever, that's fine, but whereas like if the game is like really hardcore and unpunishing, like it there's permanent death and you die and you're all the way back to the beginning. Like, I mean, that's that's really rough. And you could definitely run into like fairness issues, like if like beating the entire game is like inhumanly possible to do. Like, I mean, that could be like a really tough thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's like, I mean, kind of on the intro, like I was talking about like Crypt of the NecroDancer, which is this like incredibly difficult, like kind of rhythm based roguelike. So, I mean, for those that don't know, there's like 3 levels for it right now. So it's like you beat level 1-1, 1-2, and then there's a boss, and then 2-1, 2-2, then a boss, and level 3. And so, I mean, like the hardest achievement in this game is like you play as this character named Arya, and like she dies if she misses a beat. She can't pick up any, if she gets hit by a monster, she dies. She can't pick up any extra weapons or anything. And then part of this achievement is like you also can't like, use any, pick up any armor or any items or find any shrines or anything. And it's like, I mean, you go through like, it's like once you get to like, zone 3, it's like you've gone through like 10 minutes of like not making a mistake, and then it's like if you sneeze or something, like you miss a beat, and then you're dead and you go all the way back to the beginning. So it's like this ridiculously punishing game, and it's like, and I think they said like on their Twitter, it's like, oh, only like 6 people have done this ever, and it's like, is that like humanly possible then? I mean, maybe 6 people got lucky, 6 people cheated. I mean, who knows? But it's an incredibly difficult thing, and
But it's a different character that you can select from, right?
Yeah,
it's the main character.
Yeah,
okay.
Like this is like the challenge character, because clearly the game isn't challenging enough already.
It needs to be harder and more challenging.
There's like another character that they're adding supposedly, and I hope they don't try and like make it harder. Like, yeah, it's all that. Plus, you have to move double time or something, which would be an absolute nightmare.
I think it's interesting that they do something like that, as long as it's not the main game.
Yeah,
like you have like an easier option, but something for people that are way too good at games,
right?
That they have an option to choose from that.
Which clearly I'm not. But no, it's I kind of wonder though. It's like, how do you? And I don't know. I mean, I think it kind of depends on, kind of the game's reputation, what they're going for. But it's like, how do you know if like a game is like too hard? Because, it's like even like the default character, it's like you go look at the Steam achievements and it's like, okay, 30% of people have beat Zone 1, 10% have beat Zone 2, 5% have beat Zone 3. And then they're still adding a Zone 4. Like, this is like a game that's like in early access. So, I think it's coming out fully here pretty soon. But, then like they say on their Twitter, like, we're working on Zone 4. It might be too hard. And it's like, oh my God, what are you guys doing? It's like, it's already too hard. What do you think you're doing?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's maybe a part of the audience that they have. Roguelikes have been known for being ridiculously hard.
Right.
Like since the beginning that they existed.
Yeah.
Some of them are maybe a little bit easier than others. I think some people just wanted challenge, but I think, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I kind of did want to bring up The Binding of Isaac as an example of a game that I think is like not only incredibly difficult, but I would also argue not really all that fair. Because it's I mean, for those who don't know, it's kind of like a dungeon crawler kind of thing, kind of like a Legend of Zelda kind of layout, where it's like you go into a room and then there's like one of 4 between 1 and 4 entrances or exits to that room, and it's kind of a top down kind of thing. But it's like you beat the first floor, then the second floor, then you fight a boss, then you go on to like the next area, 2 floors of that boss, and so on and so forth. And this is a game where it's it's all randomized, so like the dungeons you go through have like randomized layouts. The kinds of monsters you fight are randomized. The supplies it gives you are randomized, so it's like whether or not you get a key to, open a treasure chest is completely subject to the whims of the random number generator living inside the game. Whether or not you get bombs so you can, blow things up to, get more supplies and, find secrets and stuff. Yeah, it's like the game will just randomly, harshly not give you any of those supplies, and then it's basically like impossible to beat the game. And then so it's, I mean, that doesn't strike me as being fair. It doesn't strike me as being fun. It's like if the game is just kind of like, you lose this round because we decided. Like, then it's like, what's the point?
Yeah, I've been playing quite a bit of Binding of Isaac on PlayStation 4 and on the Vita, and I really enjoyed it because it was kind of simple to get into it.
Right.
But the only thing that I like is when I die or when I find new items, the chances to find those items again are higher than normally. Like, you unlock more items and other characters. But the only thing that irks me a little bit about the game are more the enemy placements.
Yeah.
Like you move on a tile set. Like, you have free movement, but still it's kind of like a grid. But you can still move like diagonally.
Yeah.
But some enemies just fly straight at you, and there's no way to dodge those enemies, and then you have to also think about moving enemies and bullets, and in some cases I feel like I could not avoid being hit now.
Exactly, yeah. And especially if like you've been given items that like don't help your stats out or even lower them. It's like there's like pills in the game you can take, and it's like until you've identified them, like they have like some random effect. So it's like you might take a pill and it's like, oh, by the way, this one lowers your health. And it's like, what the hell? And it's like, okay, maybe you're out there saying like, oh, well, you shouldn't take a pill unless you can identify it or okay, fine. But then there's like sometimes you'll go into a level and it's like, oh, by the way, you can't see what any of the items are on this level just to be a jerk. And it's like there's nothing you can do about that. So, you can randomly like pick up some artifact that it's like, oh, by the way, this one lowers your, sets all your stats to 1. And it's like, you had no way of knowing that's what that was and was there. And
I would have liked it a little bit more if, for example, the pills, like once you use them, afterwards you always have the same result. But a blue pill can mean something differently the next playthrough. So.
Right.
What I learned does not apply anymore.
Yeah,
it's just I need to try it again, and that it's a little bit nitpicky maybe, but that's the only thing that or one of the small things that I don't like about games like those.
Yeah,
like,
and I mean, there are some games which I mean, I kind of like you were talking about like the unlocks, but it's like there's other games which do kinds of things to. It's like even if you don't beat it, like you do something where it's like, okay, well, like the next time you play, you'll have 1 more health point, or like different more items in the the labyrinth that you go through. So it's like even if you're not winning, like you're still at least progressing in some kind of way. So it's like at least that, I don't know, makes the harshness a little more fair. I don't know. But it's I mean, something like you said, like if the pills were permanently identified, like that might be pretty cool.
Yeah, I would have liked it more if the progression or by playing it more, that there's a progression beneath all that. Like what the pills are, what all the items do, and that you can anticipate a lot better what is coming up, instead of, well, you're gonna play like for 45 minutes again and you don't know what you're gonna get. So just some progression would help a lot for me personally with those kind of games. Like I feel like I'm investing time in the game now, and I know once I finish this run, either I die or finish the game, I know the next run will be better because I am gaining something
Yeah, and I think Crypt and the NecroDancer like does a really good job of that. So it's like when you play through the game, it's like you can like find these little diamonds throughout the levels, as you play through them, and then it's like when you die or finish the run, it's like you can go back and spend those to like you can get like stat upgrades. So it's like you can increase your health, and you can spend the diamonds to like start with like different weapons and items. Then you can also like unlock items. Like various things. So it's basically something that gives you like a sense of like, hey, it's like sure I died and like that, I had permanent death and everything, but at least there was some kind of, at least I got something out of it. And then, of course, then they have hardcore mode, which none of that matters, and you start with incredibly low health because... anyway.
Well, I think that's a very approachable way to do those games. Like, that you can buy other armor or more health. Like, I think that's very nice of them to do something like that.
Yeah.
I like that system.
Yeah. It's I mean, kind of like the next thing we're working on. Like, it's got some of these little roguelike elements. So we're definitely trying to do stuff like that. So that it's like people feel like some kind of like they're making some kind of progress and like their decisions matter. The things they do matter. So and then another thing I wanted to touch on real quick is I mean, again, it's like we've been talking about how. It's like certainly a hard difficulty can kind of lead to unfairness, but just to kind of illustrate like how different I really think they are. I want to mention a game that I feel like is really easy yet it's unfair, and that game is Peggle. And like for those who don't know, like it's basically a game where it's like you drop a ball from like the top of the screen and it bounces on all these little pegs, and then it eventually drops in like a little bucket, and basically what you're trying to do is like you're trying to get rid of all the pegs, and each time you hit a peg, like it goes away, but you're trying to get rid of those pegs with like a set number of balls, and basically it's kind of like the outcome is kind of random. So it's like you can kind of point, you can kind of predict the ball or predictable. You can kind of predict where the ball is going to go after a bounce or two, but you don't really know what it's going to do for the vast majority of its bounces. So you're kind of sending it somewhere and just kind of hoping for the best. Like it's very difficult to like be very good and highly skilled at the game. Maybe at like this extreme level, but yeah. I mean, so it's kind of for the most part. So you just kind of shoot the ball, and it's just kind of dictated by randomness and luck, and like that's like anyone can do it. It's like, I mean, a child almost has like the same chance of winning as like a master Peggle player, but at the same time it's like it's not necessarily like fair to the player. It's like if you lose at it, it's like it's almost like it's not your fault. It's like you just got some bad bounces, and
But I think with Peggle, there's a lot of feedback, or when you do something right, like everything is moving and playing a sound. Like it's still fun, even if you miss a ball. I guess like you have to slow down and such. And a game does not last that long. I guess like 20 minutes or 15 minutes or something.
Yeah, I think probably even shorter.
Yeah, I have not played Peggle because I know some people that are pretty good at it. You can probably get good at it, but I don't see it.
Right.
It's not a game for me. Like,
Yeah. But I do think that it's like you don't want every game to be like super duper skill based. Like it's definitely like a different kind of game that I think appeals to different kinds of people. Like it's definitely like a lot more casual of a game. Like if the outcome is kind of like luck based, like that's kind of good for people who aren't super hardcore. I'm gonna grind all day and level up. I'm gonna spend 10 hours here working on my night elf.
I think it's a perfect game to play while drinking a cup of coffee and reading a newspaper. Just play a little bit, just for fun.
Kind of let steam off. It's it's kind of like I lost whatever, I won whatever. It's very 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 casual. So
I I think those games are not meant for me at all. But
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah, you can get good at Peggle, also with the pachinko, but I don't know how they do it. And maybe someday I I will learn the complicated systems of Peggle.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean that's a game that I do have all the achievements in because I have no life. But I mean it's basically like I mean a lot of it's luck. Like you just gotta have like that one magical run where it's like you hit all the pegs. But I mean there's a little bit of skill involved, but it's like I don't know, it's very silly. But I mean like the main point is just kind of to illustrate how kind of fairness and difficulty are separate kind of entities, ideas, and it's like you can have a game that's unfair but easy, and you can have a game that's incredibly difficult and also fair. I think one way you can tell like your game is unbalanced is if like the developer like has trouble beating it consistently. And again, I mean like this doesn't necessarily apply to Horizon Danger, but it's like you would expect a developer to be highly skilled at the game. So, if the game is really testing skill, like they should be able to beat it most of the time. But yeah, if they can, I mean, it's definitely a bit of a red flag for fairness. But yeah,
yeah. I think it.
But yeah, I mean, playtesting I think is incredibly important.
Oh yeah, for sure. Playtesting is for me the most valuable moments. For seeing if a game works or not. Sometimes I let other players play the game and just hearing the banter and seeing them getting, killing each other within the game and not feeling that they are at a disadvantage or something. That's cool to see, and it's a good moment to look at that, right. If that happens or if the balance is there. But so far, yeah, maybe Horizon Danger has been quite simple so far on the unfair and the difficulty level, because it's all player interaction and all the same rule sets are each player has the same rule set.
Yeah. So I mean, because of that, I mean, it's almost impossible for it to not be fair, Yeah,
I had an idea to introduce something like I've been pretty open with the development on my blog, and sometimes I have an idea and I just post it online. Like some time ago, I posted that I wanted to introduce stage events, so something happens in the stage that can also kill the player. In one stage there's like a big monster on the background, and I thought maybe it's fun if the monster would also do something within the battle. Mm-hmm. But then I was like, no, because then you have the same problem again with power-ups, like right. The location of where the player is. Like if the other player is where the monster attacks, then it feels unfair again. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of the idea is still back in my mind, but I don't think I'm gonna do that.
Yeah.
So it's
And it's one of those things where it's like it could be slightly unfair, but if there's enough warning and like, hey, the monster's going to be coming out from here, then it's like maybe players have enough time that they can react to that and kind of get out of the way without it being too unfair. So
yeah, and then you get like in the territory again, like there should be a tell, there should be an audio cue,
shadow, or the foot's about to come down or something.
Yeah, a big warning in the screen, like, hey man, watch out, something has happened. Right, it's gonna happen. Yeah. Then you need to do that stuff. Mm-hmm. But yeah. It's,
and if it's like primarily like a party game, I mean that could, it's probably okay if it that kind of thing happens, like even if it's not 100% fair.
Yeah. There should be a balance between fair and getting unfair. That's kind of obvious, but it's something that you can only discover with playtesting and playing with friends or playing the game over and over again.
Have you ever played a game where like you don't feel like it's done a very good job of explaining the rules, and then it just kind of throws you in there?
I think some older games have a problem with that, but those are maybe mainly due to hardware limitations, I guess. Like in Castlevania, you have like a boss encounter with death, and the boss throws some weapons in the stage, and the movement is so limited, and the stage where I'm on is also very limited. It just becomes more frustrating than like I feel like I'm doing a good job. It's more luck based,
Right.
and that's a problem.
Yeah, Death was really bad about that.
Oh yeah, man! I spent so many hours on trying to kill that boss,
Yeah.
and then you get to the end boss, and then it's even gets worse. But I think the worst offender in those in that game is like the Medusa heads. They fly in a sinus movement, but whenever you take a step back and move forward again, the whole pattern gets changed. So you have to avoid more Medusa heads.
Yeah.
They fly from the left to the right, and they get so difficult to avoid, and then it becomes more frustrating than I feel like I can apply patience and skill to that situation. Like it's more luck based.
Yeah, I think that's something that like Castlevania, and I even saw a little bit of this in Shovel Knight. It's like it puts you in these situations where it's like you have to deal with something like that, and it's like you just don't have the adequate tools to deal with it. It's like you said, like the Medusa heads. It's like they're moving up and down all around, and it's like you're not necessarily ever in a range where it's like you can attack them, and it's like the way you move, like it's so limited. Like it's like once you jump, it's like you're a brick sailing through the air. It's like you can't necessarily. It's like your movement doesn't allow you to necessarily get away from them in a lot of situations. And I think Death, by the way, it's a great example of like just like the game being horribly unfair. It's like it's shooting these things at you in every direction, and it's like. Mm-hmm. You just can't get around it most of the time. So you just end up dying, and then you try again, and then it's like that time you get lucky, and like the things didn't hit you that time, and it's almost like your skill is like irrelevant. It's like, hey, they just didn't hit me this time. Okay, cool. But if they had come at me, I would have died. So
yeah. And then you are forced to like cheap tactics to kill the boss. Like that can be killed easily when the boss is on the first frame or something, and you throw those flasks on the ground so it gets stuck over there. Then you can kill it kind of quick.
Right.
And once you encounter that, then I think you have a problem. Something that I also don't like, and that we discussed a little bit, is the view that you have in certain first-person shooter games. Like you're so limited, and the enemy can see everything. With another game I played recently, it was Far Cry 4, and sometimes there's just way too many stuff going on, and all the enemies are shooting at me, and there are like helicopters shooting at me, and then I'm just forced to cheat or to cheat a little bit and hide in a cave or hide behind a rock to just shoot everyone one by one, and it doesn't feel like I'm in control of the game anymore. Like it's too much.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's important to. It's important to like in a 3D game like Far Cry or Doom or something, that it's like everything has sounds, like it makes sounds. That way, like if they're outside of your field of view, it's like you can still hear them coming. It's like to this day, it's like I still end up playing a lot of Doom, and like that's one of my chief complaints about the design of the game. It's like a lot of the projectiles and things that enemies shoot, like they don't make any kind of sound other than like when they're first spawned. So it's like if you're playing in like this gigantic map, like a Revenant will shoot like a homing fireball, and it's it just kind of travels all across the map and homes in on you without making any kind of sound. Like if you're not turned around looking at it, you have no idea that it's coming, and then it smacks you, and because those things do so much damage, like it ends up killing you half the time. But it's the same for the rockets that like the Cyber Demon shoots, and Lost Souls who just kind of shoot right at you and don't make any sense.
Those are terrible.
Yeah. Oh god. Yeah. And especially when there's like a monster that spawns them, the pain elementals. That's
I think games have gotten a little bit better with the audio design, like letting know where enemies are. I'm curious, like where games are heading with the, and especially first-person shooter games with the Oculus Rift or something, where the field of view is bigger and more lifelike. What you can see, like I wonder if how that ends up, and if that will improve those games and those situations. I don't know, but
it might,
I hope so.
But if things are well designed and making sounds so that even if they're outside your field of view, you can still tell that they're there. It should make that a little bit irrelevant, but I think for the games that do a bad job and don't have sounds, because your field of view is a little bigger, maybe they'll end up improving those a little more. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But like just real quick, like a modern game that I don't think does a good job on this is the game Sanctum 2, which for those who don't know it's kind of like a first-person shooter tower defense game. So it's a game where you kind of have enemies like running through a maze as you set up towers to kill them, and it's like you can kind of like sit on your towers and attack them. But because like there's so many enemies, because it's a tower defense game, it's like they can't really make each enemy have like a distinct sound. Those would just be a sea of noise, and it'd be really hard to kind of pick out an individual one. But so basically the result is like you'll end up like sitting on one of your little like barriers, and you're kind of attacking one enemy, and another just kind of comes up behind you and whacks you, and like you had no idea it was there because like it didn't make any kind of sound. It basically gave you no indication. It was outside of your field of view, so you have like no indication that it's there, and it just runs up and smacks you, usually into a pile of monsters who then gang rape you, and that's basically the end of it. You can't like be constantly looking behind you to see if there's an enemy behind you, because like you gotta focus on like enemies regenerate, and like there's tons of them, so it's like you can't really take your focus off them. So it's like anything that asks you to be psychic or have eyes in the back of your head, that's just like a telltale sign that it's just not fairly designed.
Yeah, I think it's a big challenge to have the perfect balance in a game. I think the latest Wolfenstein did a very well job with the level design and the enemy placement. You have like enough moments where there's no combat, and whenever there's combat, like it's very segmented, and you have good movement, like the shooting feels nice, and there's always ammo or armor around. I felt like that game felt like a proper. Well, it felt like an old first person shooter in a new fresh coat.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people say. That sounds good. I'm gonna have to check that out here pretty soon.
Oh, you should. I think it's it's a fantastic game.
So that was my conversation with Stephan Caffa. I definitely went into it with the idea that games should always be fair, but I came away from it thinking that maybe that's not true in every case. We talked about Peggle during the conversation, but one of the things we talked about afterwards was poker. I think most of you are familiar with it, but for those who aren't, it's basically a card game where everyone's dealt 5 cards, and you're allowed to swap out 2 of them, but basically the person with the best hand wins. There's certainly plenty of skill involved in the game. You have to know which cards to discard, and it's usually a gambling game, so there's some element of bluffing and card counting. I don't know, various techniques, which I'm not all that familiar with, but luck does play a huge role in the game. And I think because it's a social game, it's a game that's primarily played amongst friends so they can have a good time, it's good that luck plays a good role. If the same person kept winning all the time, most people would quickly tire of it and not want to play it anymore. I think the same goes for a game that's meant to be played at a party, like a Mario Party game or something. So it's pretty interesting. Instead of unfairness being something that should be avoided at all times by game designers, it actually seems like it actually has some situational uses. But if you're making a game that prides itself on the challenge, Please make it fair. Before we go, I want to make sure I credit the music that was used in this episode. The intro is from Crypt of the NecroDancer. That should be coming out here pretty soon. As I mentioned during the conversation, it is currently in early access, but seems like they're finishing it up, so hopefully that should be all done soon. Very much looking forward to that. And the music leading up to the conversation is from Super Meat Boy, so lots of Danny Baranowski music this episode, which is awesome because he and his music are awesome. So I think we'll top it off by riding out of here with some music from The Binding of Isaac. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this week's episode. If you have comments or would like something you'd like to see on a future episode, you can hit me up on Twitter at FBE Carnival. Until then, we'll be back next week with a new episode. Thanks.